I speak to you today with feelings of profound...
The velvet box sat open on the desk. King Charles did not look up when Camilla entered the room. He simply pushed the heavy gold casing aside. Her final written plea lay on the floor, completely ignored. Decades of royal tradition ended with that single gesture. Charles turned his back on the past. He reached for the phone and summoned Kate to the private study immediately. The balance of power inside the palace shifted forever in less than 1 minute. Camilla's time at the top was over. The new era had already begun behind closed doors. The secret inventory at Clarence House. The heavy iron door of the basement vault creaked open at midnight. A senior courier carried a black leather binder across the stone floor of Clarence House. Inside that binder lay the master registry of the crown jewels. King Charles signed his name at the bottom of page 42. That single signature revoked Queen Camilla's access to the historic coronation regalia. It was a cold administrative strike. Security clearance codes changed across the entire estate before dawn. Courtiers received new directives on their secure devices. The timeline for this shift began in late 2025. Palace officials noticed a series of quiet amendments to the royal property laws. These changes did not leak to the press. They happened in small, windowless offices deep within Buckingham Palace. Camilla's personal staff found themselves locked out of the primary wardrobe rooms by 9 o'clock the next morning. A guard stood outside the secondary vault. He did not offer an explanation. He simply pointed to the new manifest on his clipboard. The courier who delivered the binder did not return to his usual quarters. He left London on an early train to Windsor Castle. He carried a smaller, velvet-lined case meant for a different recipient. This was not a temporary logistical mix-up. It was a calculated recalculation of dynastic power. The old hierarchy was dismantling itself from the top down. Every locked drawer signaled a change in allegiance. A senior archivist arrived at the vault entry point exactly 20 minutes after the courier departed. He carried a digital tablet linked directly to the Privy Purse account. His task was to cross-reference every physical item against the new ledger. The items were not just historical decorations. They represented the physical authority of the consort role. By changing the signature requirements, the king effectively froze the assets of the current queen. The air inside the lower levels of the house remained damp and cold. Storage units held items dating back to the reign of King George III. Each piece required specific humidity levels and constant monitoring. The archivist bypassed the rows of ceremonial silver. He stopped instead at the third secure locker on the left side of the aisle. The digital lock showed a red light, indicating access denied to standard staff members. A new security badge was required to open this specific compartment. The archivist produced a temporary card issued by the Lord Chamberlain's office. The light turned green, and the heavy door swung open to reveal 3 leather boxes. These boxes held the diamond Collet necklace and the matching earrings worn at previous state openings of Parliament. The inventory description was updated in the system within seconds. The new location code pointed away from the traditional Queen's suite. Outside the vault, the corridors of the mansion remained completely silent. The staff members on night duty followed their usual routines without deviation. They cleaned the silver in the pantry and checked the window locks on the ground floor. None of them knew about the administrative transition happening directly beneath their feet. The orders had been kept entirely within the inner circle of the royal household. The decision to rewrite the access logs did not happen overnight. It followed a private meeting held in the library 3 days prior. During that session, legal advisors presented a report on the ownership structure of the personal jewelry collection. Some items belonged to the state, while others were private family property. The king chose to reclassify several key pieces as sovereign assets. This move placed them entirely under his personal control. Camilla's private secretary arrived at her desk at 7 o'clock the following morning. She immediately noticed an administrative memo on her screen. The memo detailed a complete restructuring of the jewelry maintenance budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The funding for restoration work on the Queen's crown had been deleted. The money was transferred to a new account labeled simply as Special Projects Wales. The secretary attempted to call the financial department for clarification. The line was busy for over 40 minutes. When she finally reached a clerk, she was told that the budget adjustments were final. The directive had come directly from the highest level of the Treasury branch. No further discussion would be permitted on the matter. The phone call ended abruptly with a standard polite sign-off. By 8 o'clock, the physical changes became apparent to the wardrobe staff. The senior dressmaker arrived to prepare the garments for an afternoon reception. She found that the secondary key to the jewelry safe no longer fit the mechanism. A new digital keypad had been installed over the traditional keyhole during the night. The installation crew had left no record of their work in the local logbook. The dressmaker contacted the security office on the internal intercom system. The officer on duty informed her that all access requests now had to go through the master custodian's office. This process required a 24-hour notice period. The immediate preparation for the afternoon event was completely disrupted. The dressmaker could only select standard pearls from the daywear cabinet. The shift in protocol spread quickly through the lower levels of the household. Staff members spoke in quiet tones in the staff room. They noticed that certain portraits had been moved from the main gallery to the storage rooms. These paintings depicted historical queens who had fallen out of favor with the reigning monarchs of their time. The symbolic meaning of the removals was not lost on the long-serving employees. The courier who left for Windsor reached his destination before the sun came up. He delivered the velvet-lined case to the security detail at the gate. The package was logged as an urgent delivery for the Princess of Wales. It did not pass through the central mailroom of the castle. It went straight up the private staircase to the family apartments. Inside that case was the legal paperwork confirming the future transfer of the regalia. The documents were signed by the king and witnessed by the archbishop. They established a permanent trust that bypassed the current consort entirely. The future queen was now the legal custodian of the most valuable symbols of the monarchy. The arrangement was legally binding and could not be altered by future royal decrees. The king spent the early hours of the morning in his private study. He did not attend the usual breakfast briefing with his advisors. Instead, he reviewed the updated security reports on his desk. The data confirmed that all access points had been successfully secured. The transition had occurred without any public disruption or leaks to the media. The administrative wall was complete. Camilla remained in her apartments until mid-morning. When she finally requested her daily schedule, she found several appointments had been canceled. A meeting with a prominent jewelry designer was missing from the list. The designer had been scheduled to discuss modifications to a historic tiara for an upcoming international tour. The appointment was replaced by a standard briefing with the estate manager. The estate manager arrived precisely at 11 o'clock. He carried a map of the property boundaries of the various royal estates. He explained that certain land parcels were being reassigned to the Duchy of Cornwall. These areas included several private gardens that Camilla had personally managed for over a decade. The management rights were being transferred to Prince William's team, effective immediately. The explanation provided was purely financial. The manager cited tax efficiencies and modern accounting practices. He did not mention the jewelry vault or the midnight courier. The tone of the meeting remained strictly professional and dry. Camilla listened to the presentation without interrupting. She signed the acknowledgement form at the bottom of the map with a steady hand. The paperwork was collected and placed back into a leather briefcase. The manager thanked the Queen for her time and departed through the side door. The room became quiet once again. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 11 times, its sound echoing in the large space. The reality of the administrative reduction was now undeniable. By early afternoon, the news of the budget changes reached the wider circle of courtiers. A prominent advisor to the Prince of Wales arrived at Clarence House for a scheduled lunch. He did not enter through the front gates. He used the private garden entrance, carrying a folder of architectural drawings for the renovations at Adelaide Cottage. The drawings showed plans for an expanded secure room within the cottage. This room was designed to hold high-value historical artifacts under advanced climate control. The specifications matched the requirements for the storage of the crown jewels exactly. The funding for this construction project came directly from the money carved out of the Queen's maintenance budget. The construction work was scheduled to begin the following Monday. Local contractors had already been vetted by the security branch. They were required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements before entering the grounds. The project was described to the public as a routine structural repair to the historic cottage walls. The true purpose remained a closely guarded secret among 4 people. The king left for an official engagement in London at 2 in the afternoon. His car drove past the reporters waiting at the gates. He smiled and waved as the cameras flashed. There was no outward sign of the internal struggle that had taken place over the previous 12 hours. The public face of the monarchy remained calm, stable, and completely unchanged. Back inside the house, the archivist finished his work in the basement vault. He closed the black leather binder and locked it inside the central safe. The master registry was now fully updated to reflect the new legal reality. The historic gold and diamonds were no longer tied to the title of the current queen. They were tied directly to the future of the lineage, secured firmly in the hands of Kate. 2. Wills clashing. Behind closed doors. The library door at Clarence House clicked shut at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. King Charles stood by the window, his back turned to the room. Queen Camilla stood by the heavy mahogany desk, her eyes fixed on the blue folder resting next to the inkwell. The room was heated, yet the atmosphere between the two monarchs remained ice cold. No staffers were permitted inside the room. The usual team of private secretaries waited at the far end of the long corridor, well out of earshot. The blue folder contained the executive decree that stripped the current consort of her traditional regalia rights. This was not a draft or a proposal for future discussion. It was a finalized sovereign mandate, bearing the official seal of the Privy Council from earlier in 2026. The text outlined a permanent reassignment of the historic family heirlooms, shifting them directly away from Camilla's office. Camilla did not sit down. She reached out and touched the edge of the folder with her index finger. She spoke in a low, even tone, asking if the decision was truly final. Charles did not turn around immediately. He watched the rain strike the glass pane looking out over the garden. When he finally faced her, his expression was completely devoid of hesitation. He gave a single, firm nod. The confrontation did not involve shouting or dramatic gestures. It was a battle of endurance and administrative leverage. Camilla pointed out that she had fulfilled every public obligation for years without complaint. She reminded him of the promises made during the transition period of 2023, when her position seemed entirely secure. Charles answered by citing the absolute necessity of institutional survival. He explained that the legal framework of the monarchy required a clear, undisputed line of visual authority. The public needed to see the future of the crown clearly mapped out. By placing the historic jewelry and the associated ceremonial duties in the hands of Kate, the family was sending a message of permanent stability. It was a mathematical calculation, not a personal slight. Camilla opened the folder and read the third paragraph aloud. Her voice cracked slightly on the words regarding the immediate surrender of the keys to the Windsor repository. That repository held the emerald tiaras that she had personally selected for the upcoming autumn tour. According to the new text, those items were now classified as restricted assets, accessible only by the Princess of Wales. Charles walked over to the desk and picked up a silver pen. He offered it to her, indicating the acknowledgement line at the bottom of the page. He stated that signing the document now would prevent any public awkwardness during the upcoming state opening. If she refused, the budget adjustments would simply take effect automatically without her formal consent. The choice was purely about maintaining administrative dignity. Camilla pushed the pen aside. She argued that this move would look like a public demotion to the inner circle of the court. The palace courtiers would notice the change in wardrobe immediately. The shifting of the guards, the modification of the schedules, and the sudden drop in her household budget could not be hidden from the senior staff. The balance of power would tip instantly, turning her office into a secondary department. Charles did not deny her assessment. He explained that the court had already begun adapting to the new reality. The Treasury officials had processed the budget transfers before noon. The security teams had already updated the access codes for the subterranean vaults. The machinery of the state was already moving forward, regardless of her signature. Her refusal would only isolate her office further from the central decision-making process. The conversation turned toward the specific role of Prince William in organizing the transition. Camilla asked how much the prince knew about the midnight ledger updates. Charles revealed that William had actually co-signed the original Treasury directive 3 weeks prior. The decision was a unified front between the sovereign and the heir. There was no room for negotiation between the different branches of the family. The realization settled heavily into the quiet room. Camilla walked over to the fireplace, turning her back to the desk. She looked at the portrait of King George V hanging above the mantelpiece. That monarch had also made difficult choices regarding family titles and property during times of crisis. The parallel was clear. But the modern execution felt much swifter and colder. Charles placed the pen back into its holder with a sharp click. He reminded her that the monarchy had survived for centuries because it prioritized the institution over individual preferences. The decision to secure Kate's position was part of a larger, long-term strategy to protect the succession line. It was an act of preservation, designed to remove any ambiguity about who would carry the symbolic weight of the crown next. The clock on the desk chimed 4:15. The 15 minutes felt like hours to the aides waiting outside in the gallery. A junior page approached the library door, carrying a tray of tea, but the senior equerry shook his head and waved him away. The meeting could not be interrupted for any standard household routine. The future direction of the household was being decided behind that single sheet of oak. Camilla turned back to face the king. She asked what would happen to her personal patronages if she refused to accept the terms of the blue folder. Charles answered directly, stating that her charitable roles would remain intact, but her ceremonial prominence would be severely curtailed. She would continue her work with literacy and domestic abuse charities, but she would do so without the historic regalia that signified supreme royal status. The compromise offered was minimal. It allowed her to keep her titles but stripped away the physical evidence of her authority. It was a functional retirement from the grandest stage of state pageantry. The power was flowing toward Adelaide Cottage, and no amount of personal appeal could reverse the current. The legal documents were ironclad, drawn up by the finest constitutional experts in the kingdom. Camilla picked up the blue folder, closed it, and held it against her side. She stated that she needed 24 hours to review the text with her personal legal advisor. Charles stepped back and nodded once more. He granted the extension, but reminded her that the midnight courier had already delivered the duplicates to Windsor. The process could not be paused or recalled. He walked toward the double doors, ending the private audience. As he opened the door, the waiting secretaries immediately straightened their jackets and picked up their clipboards. The king did not say a word to them. He walked past the line of staff and disappeared down the long gallery toward his private study. The door closed behind him, leaving the hallway in absolute silence. Camilla remained inside the library for another 5 minutes alone. She looked down at the desk, where the empty space next to the inkwell seemed larger than before. The physical document was in her hands, but the true authority had already left the room. She walked out through the side entrance, bypassing the main staff entirely, and returned to her private quarters to read the fine print. The paperwork detailed every single necklace, brooch, and tiara that had been reclassified. The list went on for 6 pages, describing the weight, history, and new storage destination of each piece. By the time she reached the final page, the sun had gone down completely. The lights of London began to flicker outside her window, marking the end of the old order and the definitive start of the new regime. The midnight summons for Kate. The headlights of the royal vehicle cut through the heavy fog surrounding Windsor Great Park at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The car pulled up to the gravel driveway of Adelaide Cottage without activating its sirens or security flashes. A single guard stepped out of the shadows, checked the courier's identification badge against his digital manifest, and signaled for the front door to be opened. Inside the residence, the lights in the main sitting room were already turned on. Kate, the Princess of Wales, sat by the small writing desk, wearing a simple dark wool coat. She did not look tired despite the extreme lateness of the hour. She had received a secure, encrypted message from the king's private office less than 60 minutes prior, instructing her to await an immediate administrative delivery. The courier entered the room silently, bowed, and placed the smaller, velvet-lined transport case on the desk. He reached into his jacket pocket to produce a silver sign-off sheet. The paperwork required a physical signature, a deliberate choice made to avoid leaving a digital trail on the standard palace servers. Kate picked up a fountain pen and signed her name on the designated line. As soon as the courier departed, Prince William entered the sitting room from the adjoining study. He did not speak. He walked over to the desk and opened the brass clasps of the velvet case. Inside lay the master key to the subterranean storage units at Windsor Castle, alongside a bound leather manual stamped with the royal crest. This manual contained the exact operational protocols for managing the sovereign's personal estate assets. The inclusion of the master key was the most significant detail of the midnight delivery. That key had been in the personal possession of the reigning consort since the coronation ceremony in 2023. Its sudden transfer to Berkshire confirmed that the administrative transition was moving at an accelerated pace. The king was not waiting for a public announcement to change the balance of power. He was doing it under the cover of darkness. William picked up the manual and turned to the section marked Appendix C. This page listed the specific ceremonial responsibilities that were being shifted away from Clarence House. The document explicitly stated that the Princess of Wales would now take over the primary positioning for all international state visits. This meant that during the upcoming autumn calendar, Kate would be the one wearing the historic regalia, effectively sidelining Camilla on the global stage. The strategy behind this sudden acceleration was rooted in a private agreement made between Charles and his heir earlier that month. The king's advisors had noted a growing public demand for a clear, modern vision of the monarchy's future. By transferring the symbolic and physical weight of the crown to Kate now, the institution was securing its long-term survival against any potential internal conflict. Kate reached out and took the master key from the velvet lining. The cold metal represented a massive inflation of her institutional responsibilities. It was no longer just about attending charitable galas or representing the family at public events. She was now the official guardian of the visual identity of the kingdom. The weight of the future was officially resting on her shoulders. The silence inside the cottage was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. William walked over to the window and looked out toward the distant silhouette of the castle. He noted that the security lights around the main vault area had been shifted to a higher readiness level. The entire perimeter was now operating under the updated protocol dictated by the king's midnight decree. The transition process required absolute precision from the household staff. Before dawn, a small team of trusted wardrobe assistants would arrive at Windsor to begin moving the physical containers from the old storage lockers to the new secure room inside Adelaide Cottage. The staff had been selected based on decades of flawless service and absolute discretion. Kate closed the manual and placed it back inside the transport case. She looked at her husband, acknowledging the silent reality of their new position. The boundaries between the different generations of the family had been permanently redrawn in less than an hour. There was no going back to the old compromises. The morning light began to break through the fog by 5 o'clock. The paperwork was safely locked inside the home's primary safe, and the velvet case was hidden from view. To the outside world, the cottage remained a quiet family home in the middle of the park. But inside, the foundation for the next reign had already been laid, setting the stage for a dramatic shift that the rest of the palace would have to accept before the weekend. The rejection of the final plea. The morning briefing in the king's private study at Buckingham Palace began at precisely 9 o'clock. King Charles sat behind his large oak desk, reviewing the daily intelligence briefs and treasury reports. A soft knock at the door interrupted the silence. A senior equerry entered, carrying a single piece of thick cream stationery bearing Queen Camilla's personal monogram. This document was not a standard administrative memo. It was a formal written plea, drafted by Camilla during the late hours of the previous evening. The letter contained 3 specific conditions regarding the restructuring of her household. It was her final attempt to stop the complete transfer of her ceremonial authority to Kate. The first condition in the letter requested a temporary suspension of the new jewelry inventory protocol until the end of the current legislative year. Camilla argued that a sudden change in her public appearance during upcoming foreign tours would spark intense media speculation. She proposed a gradual transition phase, allowing her to retain custody of the primary tiaras for at least 6 more months. The second condition focused on the budget allocations for her communication team. She requested that the funding cuts to her media department be paused, allowing her to maintain her independent press strategy. Without these resources, her office would become entirely dependent on the Central Palace press pool, which was increasingly managed by Prince William's advisors. Charles read through the 2-page document without changing his expression. He did not call for his legal advisors or ask for a second opinion from his private secretary. The strategy had already been decided weeks ago, and the paperwork delivered to Adelaide Cottage at midnight could not be undone. The request for a delay was fundamentally incompatible with the long-term survival plan of the monarchy. The king picked up a heavy black fountain pen. He did not write a lengthy reply or offer a detailed counter-argument. Instead, he drew a single straight line through each of the 3 conditions on the page. At the bottom of the stationery, he wrote a brief, 6-word phrase: "The transition proceeds as ordered today." He handed the defaced letter back to the waiting equerry. The instruction was clear. The equerry was to deliver the rejected plea directly back to Camilla's office at Clarence House before noon. There would be no follow-up audience, no room for verbal appeal, and no further debate on the matter behind closed doors. The rejection marked a definitive turning point in the internal power struggle. For decades, the relationship between Charles and Camilla had been built on mutual compromise and shared public branding. But the demands of the modern institution had now overridden personal history. The necessity of presenting a strong, forward-looking monarchy centered on the Princess of Wales was absolute. By 11 o'clock, the rejected document arrived back on Camilla's desk. Her private secretary opened the envelope and placed the marked-up paper under the green desk lamp. The thick black lines across the text left no doubt about the absolute finality of the king's decision. The independent authority of the Queen Consort's office was officially dismantled. A few minutes later, the internal phone line rang in the Clarence House office. The chief of staff from the Central Treasury branch was calling to confirm that the budget transfers had just been completed. The funds for the Queen's ceremonial wardrobe were now listed as 0 on the updated balance sheets. The administrative strike was total, leaving the old guard with no financial or legal recourse. Outside the office windows, the daily changing of the guard took place as usual. The tourists gathered along the mall had no idea that a profound shift in the royal hierarchy had just been finalized. The outward appearance of continuity remained flawless, masking the complete re-engineering of the internal structure that had occurred over the last 12 hours. Camilla left her study shortly after noon, refusing her scheduled lunch tray. She walked down the long corridor toward the private sitting room, where her personal protection officers stood at attention. They noticed the change in the atmosphere immediately, but followed standard protocol, remaining silent as she passed through the double doors. The rejection of the plea sent an immediate shockwave through the smaller circle of long-serving courtiers. Several senior staffers who had worked with Camilla for over 15 years realized that their influence within the palace had vanished overnight. The loyalty of the household was shifting rapidly toward the future queen, and those who did not adapt were being left behind in the shadows. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the official daily circular was published internally. It contained no mention of the private dispute or the rejected letter. It simply listed the updated itineraries for the upcoming months, showing Kate as the sole royal representative for the major state galas. The visual transition was now locked into the calendar, setting a permanent line of succession that everyone inside the palace walls would have to follow, passing the weight of the kingdom. The state dining room at Buckingham Palace was cleared of all serving staff by 4 o'clock. A single mahogany table stood in the center of the vast space under the light of a crystal chandelier. King Charles sat at the head of the table, flanked by Kate on his right. Queen Camilla sat directly opposite them, her posture rigid. Between them lay a heavy leather portfolio containing the formal reassignments for the autumn state calendar. The atmosphere inside the room was thick with unspoken tension. This was the first time both women had sat face to face since the midnight courier had delivered the vault keys to Berkshire. Charles tapped the edge of the folder, drawing attention to the first item on the agenda. It was the upcoming diplomatic reception in London. For the past 3 years, Camilla had taken the lead on seating arrangements and jewel selection for this specific event. The new document explicitly transferred those duties to the Princess of Wales. Kate remained calm, keeping her eyes fixed on the briefing papers in front of her. She did not gloat or make unnecessary comments. She understood that this moment was not about personal victory. It was about accepting a massive inflation of her institutional responsibilities. The future of the visual brand of the monarchy was being handed to her in real time. Camilla spoke only once during the first 20 minutes of the meeting. She asked if the transition plan had been reviewed by the Parliamentary Committee on Royal Expenditures. Charles answered immediately, stating that the Prime Minister had already signed off on the structural changes during their private audience on Wednesday. Every legal loophole had been closed before the meeting was called. The physical transfer of the regalia access was finalized when Charles pushed a small velvet box toward the center of the table. Inside, was the historic signet ring used by the reigning monarch's consort to authorize official household decrees. Kate reached out and picked up the box, placing it next to her notebook. The gesture was quiet, but its impact inside the palace walls was massive. The symbolic weight of the kingdom had officially shifted down a generation. The old order could only watch as the new era took physical form on the mahogany table. The meeting ended without a single handshake, the participants departing through separate side doors. The new order. Inside the palace walls. By 5:30 in the afternoon, the administrative changes began to manifest throughout the corridors of St. James's Palace. Human resources officials began issuing new contract terms to over 40 senior staffers. The loyalty of the household was being systematically reorganized by the king's private secretary. Staff members who had spent over a decade working exclusively for Camilla's office found their security badges restricted. They could no longer access the main administrative offices without a specific escort from Prince William's team. The message was clear to everyone, from the senior advisors to the junior clerks. The balance of power had permanently altered. A prominent press officer who had previously managed Camilla's public relations campaigns was reassigned to a secondary archive department in Windsor Castle. Her old desk was cleared out before sunset, replaced by a digital operations specialist from Kate's communications branch. The palace was aggressively modernizing its public face, cutting away any elements that did not align with the future line of succession. The financial reality of the new order was detailed in a confidential memo circulated to the heads of departments at 6 o'clock. The document outlined a complete freeze on all discretionary spending for the Queen's household. Any emergency funding requests would now require the joint signatures of the King and the Prince of Wales, effectively removing Camilla's independent financial leverage. Inside the royal garages, the transport schedules were updated to reflect the new hierarchy. The primary state vehicles were allocated to the Wales household for all high-profile public engagements throughout the rest of 2026. The change was subtle enough to evade immediate public scrutiny, but inside the palace, it signaled an absolute demotion for the current consort. William spent the evening hours in his study at Kensington Palace, reviewing the final confirmation logs from the security teams. Every locked vault, every updated code, and every reassigned staff member was accounted for in the master report. The unified strategy between the sovereign and the heir had been executed with flawless, clinical precision. As night fell over London, the physical perimeter of the palace remained calm and unchanged. The tourists taking photos outside the gates had no inkling of the profound structural shift that had taken place behind the stone walls. The old guard had been quietly dismantled, and the foundation for the next reign was now firmly, undeniably set in place. The old compromises are gone, and the future of the British monarchy has been decisively placed into the hands of the next generation. King Charles has redrawn the lines of power, leaving the palace forever changed behind closed doors.